Mr. President, we meet today, as is the case every year, in the hall of the General Assembly to examine the agenda item on the situation in the Middle East and to call upon Israel to end its occupation of Arab territories and to halt its continued aggression and its racist and inhuman policies and its violation of international conventions and charters, including human rights law and international humanitarian law. We also meet here today to call upon Israel to halt its rabid settlement campaigns and its systematic killing of civilians in the occupied Arab territories. We affirm that any measures adopted by Israel, the occupying power, as it is called by the United Nations, and its resolutions, which number in the hundreds, they refer to Israel as the occupying power. We affirm that any measures undertaken by Israel, the occupying power, to impose its laws, its jurisdiction, and its administration on the city of Jerusalem and the occupied Golan are illegal measures, have no validity whatsoever, and are considered null and void. This is not just These are not just the words of the permanent representative of the Arab Syrian Republic. Rather, these are legal terms and descriptions that appeared verbatim in the texts of Security Council resolutions 478 of 1989, which rejected Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem, and Resolution 497 of the year 1981, in which the Security Council also rejected Israel, the occupying power's annexation of the occupied Syrian Golan. Despite all these demands issued by the Security Council, unfortunately, not a single bit of progress has been achieved in ending Israeli occupation and halting its aggressive practices. On the contrary, matters have gotten worse and worse, with Israel's continued escalation in an aggressive manner and in an unprecedented settlement frenzy that warns of disastrous consequences on the region and enhances the chances of war at the expense of the prospects of peace. And this is because Israel belittles the will of international legitimacy and all human and moral standards. It also ignores more than 1,000 resolutions adopted by the United Nations and its different agencies and bodies over many decades. All of these resolutions call upon Israel to withdraw from occupied Arab territories in order to establish a just and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. It is worth noting here that this Israeli escalation, be it in terms of its settlement activities or its hostile practices that target Arab citizens under Israeli occupation, what's worth noting here is that this Israeli escalation enjoys unlimited political, military, financial, and technological support. Some of it is given in the open and some of it is given in secret by some states that have falsely appointed themselves as defenders of human rights and the life of civilians. These same states have recently declared that they support the rights of Palestinians, but they only did that in words, yet threatened to use the veto to veto the simplest right that any people can enjoy, which is the right to an independent state, thus granting Israel an illegitimate immunity for all the crimes that it is committing in the occupied Arab territories, and this comes at the expense of legitimate Arab rights, especially Palestinian rights. Here, we are very puzzled by what two particular member states in this organization have done by punishing UNESCO, because this organization granted membership to Palestine. And these two states have used weak and unconvincing excuses that can only be understood in the context of defending and protecting Israel only at the expense of the Palestinians' basic rights. Some states claim that they are against settlements and support the two-state solution. However, this hypocrisy is belied by their actions, because we have not seen these states take a single measure to put a stop to the escalating settlement activity. These settlement campaigns are known to all near and far to undermine any hope in achieving a two-state solution and in achieving peace in the region. These states, these same states, did not even try to criticize Israel or exert any pressure on it. Rather, these states continue to hold the Palestinians, unjustly so, fully responsible for the failure to achieve peace. It is as if those Palestinians who are deprived of their basic human rights, it is as if they are the ones occupying the lands of others and are the ones building settlements on the lands of others and collecting their diaspora from the four corners of the world to live in a land that they don't own and violate international humanitarian law and human rights and practice state terrorism. It is as if the Palestinians are the ones who are doing all this. And it is as if Israel is a victim of all these practices. Mr. President, within the framework of this same Israeli policy that challenges international legitimacy and enjoys support by some states, Israel continues to refuse returning the occupied Syrian Golan to its motherland, Syria, and it refuses to comply to international resolutions, especially Security Council Resolution 497 of the year 1981, which considered Israel's decision to annex the occupied Syrian Golan a null and void decision with no legal effect. Moreover, Israel continues its policies of terrorism and oppression against Syrian citizens under occupation in the Golan and continues its policy of racial discrimination against them and denying them employment because these citizens refuse to carry Israeli identification papers and join the Israeli army. Moreover, Israel continues its policy of arresting civilian Syrian citizens in the occupied Golan and continues with its grave violations of the rights of prisoners, where the people of the Golan are subjected to the worst conditions of inhumane and arbitrary detention that do not meet even the minimum standards of the United Nations standards for the treatment of prisoners. Not to mention the fact that the Israeli occupation authorities, within their framework, within their continuous campaign to disconnect the occupied Syrian Golan and isolate it from its dimension and its geographic context with its motherland, Syria. In this framework, the Israeli authorities have started constructing a separating wall, a racial separation wall in the Golan, east of the town of Majd al-Shams, which aims to entrench a new security and political reality which Israel wants to use to influence any peace negotiations in the future over the occupied Golan. We have drawn the attention of the Secretary General, and we have submitted an official complaint in this regard, demanding that the United Nations, especially the Security Council, undertake their responsibilities here, and demanding that they adopt all the necessary measures against Israel to put an immediate stop to these activities, which blatantly violate the provisions of international law and the relevant resolutions of the United Nations. However, unfortunately, this complaint fell on deaf ears. Rather, the representatives of the Secretary General did not even mention this dangerous Israeli violation in their monthly briefings to the Security Council under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. This has only encouraged Israel to go further in this action by expanding this wall and bolstering it last week. This raises many questions on the impartiality and objectivity of those dealing with our legitimate and just causes at a time when we see some rush to weaken this agenda item, the situation in the Middle East, by adding internal matters to it which lie outside the historic definition of this agenda item and only with the purpose of interfering in our internal affairs under weak justifications that have no basis in reality. I would like to inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that Israel, the occupying power, has placed a 2-year-old Syrian child under house arrest, separating him from his mother and father, who were students at the University of Damascus. And after they completed their studies, they returned to the occupied Golan with the help of the Red Cross. Israel received them and their child by kidnapping the child from his parents and placing him under house arrest. The child is only 2 years old. I wanted to inform those who claim that they want to defend civilians of this. Mr. President, the option of a just and comprehensive peace will only be achieved through a full Israeli withdrawal from all occupied Arab territories to the 4 June 1967 lines and through the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital, and through reaching a just solution to the refugee issue based on Resolution 194 of the year 1948, away from any partial solutions or interim ones that aim at procrastination in this regard. And this must be done on the basis of relevant United Nations resolutions, at the forefront of which are resolutions, Security Council resolutions 242 and 338 and 497, which I mentioned earlier and which pertains to the occupied Syrian Golan. In closing, Mr. President, it has become clear to everyone that the only obstacle to peace in the region is Israel. Israel has placed the concept of peace in the region in service of the project of war and aggression because of its procrastination, which is supported by the United States and some European states in an unlimited and blind manner, even if it's at the expense of these same states' interests. This has only entrenched a feeling of frustration among Arabs and further inflamed their anger, which would have disastrous consequences on everyone. And despite our conviction that the item under discussion has nothing to do with the games and tactics of some states that are trying to force Syrian internal matters in our discussion with the aim of distracting attention from Israel's continued occupation of occupied Arab territories in Palestine, the Golan, and southern Lebanon, and in order to create a smokescreen to cover what Israel commits in terms of crimes and settlements and the daily trespassing on the text of international law as exemplified by resolutions issued by the United Nations. Despite this conviction, we would like to indicate, however, that the Syrian leadership is moving ahead with implementing a comprehensive reforms program by undertaking a group of new measures and laws that aim to enhance the process of national democratic construction and enhancing and expanding the participation of citizens in the economic and political process and enhancing national unity as well as guaranteeing public law and order and the security of the homeland and the citizen. Here we would like to note that the National Committee tasked with preparing a new draft constitution that is contemporary and which meets the aspirations of the Syrian people. This committee has completed the first draft of this pilot project, and of the basic principles upon which this draft was drafted is the principle of national sovereignty and national unity, and the principle that the people are the source of authority, as well as the principle of political pluralism, because all political parties have become equal and are only differentiated by public polling based on popular demand in terms of granting them authority to rule. Moreover, a decree was issued today releasing 912 citizens who were detained for breaking the law. These citizens were released today because they had no blood on their hands. In closing, I call the states that falsely claim to care about the will of the Syrian people, I call on them to look at the public squares in the different Syrian cities that have witnessed millions of Syrians coming out in support of the ongoing reforms in Syria and rejecting any foreign intervention regardless of its source or form, and rejecting pressure, rejecting sanctions, rejecting lies and fabrications. We hope that the member states would heed the call of these millions and respect their aspirations and will if they do indeed care about human rights. Finally, Mr. President, I can only call upon the member states to vote in favor of the two draft resolutions on Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan, as they always do, and thankfully every session, because this positive vote will reaffirm the importance of the reference point of international legitimacy as is embodied by this organization and its implementation of international law and in defense of the rights of member states. Thank you, sir.
I think the
As we all know, this has been a very turbulent year.